Welcome to the European Tech Hire Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of translating a global business into a European context, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from Europe's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to European market scaling.
Today, we are joined by a very special guest, somebody who I've been excited to have on for quite some time. I don't think you're going to meet a more passionate individual than Rory Kelly. Rory Kelly brings a wealth of customer experience knowledge to the table. He's worked across media agencies and moreover in HubSpot as a startup, very much on the customer success side, bringing forth value to customers and avoiding that dirtiest of dirty words, churn, to really help customers become their own rock stars. He's been able to navigate through the very early inceptions of HubSpot here in EMEA, grow out that team and lead that team to its success. So welcome to today's call, Rory.
Thanks, Ross. That's a hell of an introduction. I hope I can live up to 25% of that. Great to be here.
I think it's really important for our listeners to have one shameless plug, which you haven't asked me to talk about today, but I'm going to mention it anyway. And it's called rorykellycooks.com. So if anyone is looking to score serious points with their other half and you're looking for an innovative recipe for an evening, I highly recommend you check it out. It's one of Rory's many passions.
A good plug, Ross. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. I got a ton of value out of it myself, so I'm speaking through here. So Rory, just by ways of introductions, if you would you maybe just take us through your kind of career journey? What's brought you to where you are now and kind of what led you to each of those decisions during that journey, as it were?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I've often reflected on that phraseology, career journey, because as a people manager at HubSpot, it comes up, as you can imagine, all the time with the people that I'm responsible for. But when I look at my own journey, it's kind of a series of fortunate or unfortunate events, if you want, that brought me to where I am today. If I look back at probably one of the biggest impacts in my life in 2011 from a career path perspective, it was the last financial crisis or crash that we had, and I was made redundant from a position and a job that I'd held for the better part of maybe 10 years prior to that. And that was what directly led me into Ireland's tech sector and into the HubSpot iteration that I have at the minute. But before that, I kind of breezed around a little bit. I'd never really had a strict career path, an ABC, if you like. I left university with a politics degree. I decided for whatever reason that I wanted to be a chef, which is why the blog exists, and spent a couple of years as a professional chef, which was a lot of fun, but it was also a hell of a challenge in terms of the lifestyle. So anybody who's in that industry will certainly attest to that. And after a couple of years worth of learning how a professional kitchen works and how to cook, I decided to drop all of that and get back into what I would consider to be the proper normal working existence. That led me into ad agencies that I worked with in the north. That had a large sort of lean into the nature of marketing, entertainment, promotion, events. And I spent a number of years in the north working in that area. But then where I was based in Belfast is a small enough city, so I found it quite restrictive. And then my eyes kind of turned towards the bigger city on the island, Dublin, and the opportunities that existed in Dublin. And this is going back maybe 2000, 2001. Where I was lucky enough to get the chance to work with large media providers and agencies. And that was a great place to be in 2002 on, where the economy was very, very vibrant. You literally opened the windows and money flew in the door. It wasn't particularly challenging. I mean, it really didn't put you to the test a lot. But again, my kind of drive in that instance was like a lot of people in my age bracket and in that sort of vein was to get on the housing market or get into the housing market, which was really difficult because as everybody will know at that time the housing market was going through the roof. Prices were phenomenal. So it was a race to try to get as much money as possible in an industry that was providing it. And then, as I'd mentioned, the crash that kicked in around 2007-8 really started making people think differently about their careers and what they could do. And in some instances, the decisions that people made were forced on them. And again, I was one of those people that had a decision made for me. I suppose if that decision hadn't been made, I may still have been in that position. So the crash, the redundancy, my complete change of lifestyle allowed me to sit back and reflect on what I really wanted to do. And it allowed me to have a real change of tack as far as career was concerned. Tech had always fascinated me. Social media always fascinated me. I was all over the likes of Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, those social media platforms in their embryonic state in around the sort of 2010 and 11 bracket. And through a lot of endeavor and a lot of kind of persuasion and trickery and just begging and pleading, I was able to be lucky enough to be brought into one of Ireland's biggest social media PR companies back in 2011. I spent an incredible year with an agency called Simply Zesty. A lot of fun, a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But that was for me the real introduction to Ireland's crack and its tech scene, its youthfulness, and its sort of cavalier attitude towards getting work done. Loved it and felt that this was definitely the career path in that I would tend to follow. I wanted to develop that a lot more. I wanted to find out more about the tech scene. And in 2013, or just before that, this company called HubSpot popped up on my radar. I knew nothing about them. I knew they were a Bostonian company. I had an idea that they were in the marketing sphere. So I did a lot of research into who they were. They'd been around in Boston for maybe 10 years before they moved to Ireland. And when they did, they were very much a startup. And I met with a recruiter, Declan Fitzgerald, and he talked to me about them and he gave me the kind of ecosystem, what they were all about and the culture. And it just sang to me. Really, the culture sang to me, less the product and less what they did. And that intrigued me. And I spent some time, again, going through the motions of interviews, speaking to people in leadership positions within the company and also leadership positions within Ireland to get a sense of who are these people. And then getting involved in that startup with HubSpot was just phenomenal. It was do what you want, write your own script, break things, make mistakes. You don't have to worry about them. We can fix them. And it's a mark of development, it's a mark of progress, making those types of mistakes. And HubSpot really was only finding its feet in 2013 in Dublin in a really, really vibrant tech sphere. And again, I was along for that ride, along with 20 other people who had started back then. Since growing to nearly 1,000 people in Dublin across two massive buildings in the centre of the tech heartland in Dublin. And my career path in HubSpot was as an individual contributor responsible for training people who bought the software and then moving into more of a kind of people management role as a team lead and then training people to do what I did. And then more recently moving into a managerial position at the company as well and being responsible for building out and developing world-class HubSpot employees that work with some of the most exciting and vibrant customers within the European scope of operations. And that's really where it's brought me to today. It's been somewhat up and down and checkered, but a series of events such as redundancy being the biggest one has put me exactly where I am today.
Okay, so let's dive into a few of those aspects. I think two of the major things I want to talk about is what is HubSpot, what is customer success, and then I really want to go into the leadership piece as well. So you've really seen that evolution. So I suppose if we just touch on that first point, for those of our listeners who don't know, HubSpot is a unified marketing platform that loops in together multiple facets of how you create your digital presence. And what I mean by that, it's elements around SEO, creating content, managing and monitoring your social media, communicating below the line to your email, and really using a kind of multi-pronged approach, but bringing it into one sphere. It was once described to me as the iPhone of the digital marketing world. And then more recently, they've delved into customer relationship management and CRM software to manage that customer piece. and very, very focused on outbound selling as well as inbound marketing. That their big event in Boston every year is inbound. It's their global conference. And then they're also delving into customer support as well. So it's that kind of trifecta of customer engagement. One of the major and kind of more interesting parts of software as a service is it becomes more, I suppose, easy to get rid of in some sense. There will be obviously an annual contract, etc. But one of the fascinating parts of HubSpot is that they invest so much in customer acquisition that from a P&L perspective, that customer only becomes profitable after month 17 in the cycle. So you've got to keep them after that 1 year. The big challenge is that HubSpot's a very involved piece of software. It's incredibly detailed, etc. So you need to understand how to get customers to actually engage and use that and speak passionately about their business online. So maybe, Rory, could you share with us some of the good, bad, and otherwise stories of how you dealt with that when the sales guys have had their way and really brought on board the customer and it's tossed over the fence, customer success need to make it work. Can you maybe take us through that journey and how you communicated in your passionate fashion to get those customers to become their own rock stars?
Yeah, it's a really good way to kind of describe that is getting customers to become their own rock stars. They are masters really of their own destiny in all of this. There is obviously a guidance and a direction that any customer service department will provide. I think the biggest thing that we can provide for customers is to get them to think on their own 2 feet, to get them to a point of independence. You really have adequately summed up HubSpot on that detailed intro to it. It is a very complex affair from a software perspective. And in some instances, it can be very overwhelming for your average common or garden SME who purchases the iPhone of business, that HubSpot very much is. When we have customers who do come over the fence to us, it's a really delicate scenario because, as we know, the sales environment can be a dream, and our sales people do wonderful narratives and storytelling. That's across every single company. It's what they do. In some instances, we find ourselves then as realization or expectation resetters to begin with. We've always, and Ross, you'll know this as well, we've always used the analogy of personal trainers when it comes to services in HubSpot, or gym instructors, in that you have a customer who sees the catalog or they see the website and they see the dream, they see what they can do, and they buy into it. And it can be a really cold shower when they get into the reality of they need to do the work, they need to sweat, they need to feel the pain. And these are all the sorts of things that our customers need to be gently introduced to when they get into services. However, really good companies and great services personnel know how to do that in a very diplomatic, in a very comforting, but also a very collaborative way. And the one thing that always endeared me to HubSpot's attitude towards our customer base is that collaborative nature, that we're in this together, that we will be with that customer from point A to point B, and we will feel their pain, empathize, but help them through that and move through it and become independent, and also realize their ambitions and their dreams that they have with the software. So a large part of that is driven by the human element. And it's a big, big part that's close to my heart about HubSpot is the individual getting to know the individual. We kind of drop that business persona. So all of the guys and girls that are on my team will become John and Stephanie. They won't become a HubSpotter and a client or a customer. They break down these barriers and they get to know the human being. They get to know what challenges they face, what their pain points are, what does their day look like, and how can we really dovetail into that? As opposed to maybe some companies have an agenda, they got to get through this training, get the next one in. And for me, that's a massively important part of the success of HubSpot services, especially when we're dealing with customers who come over the fence to us, is we want to know who they are, what makes them tick, what's the heart and mind of that person. And that's then when we can start working with them in any kind of productive or tangible way. And I think that's one of the secrets of HubSpot's success when it comes to the service offering, is simply that we're human beings, we're fallible. We know our customers are not always going to do exactly what they should to be successful. We accept that and we can flex around that and we can bend our training to that as well. So I think the human element is super important when we get those customers in from our sales ecosystem to make them successful, Ross.
So Rory, it sounds like the core mission of you guys really, right, is focused on enabling your customers to actually realize the value from your company service and products. So, and again, it sounds like you're using proactive outreach rather than reactive outreach, which is very common to a lot of customer support models. My question is this. I've been involved in a lot of organizations where the customer success program is really really fighting for their lives in terms of getting that presence and getting that notoriety around an organization. In your opinion, why should sales leaders invest in customer success?
It's a great question, John. And I think if you look at the life cycle that any customer will have, it just doesn't stop after the sale, because the old kind of marketing and sales analogy about referral being the greatest sales tool that you have is so important. And one of the mantras that HubSpot has is about delighting customers. And that can only happen within that service environment. I think it will be very short-sighted of any company just to heavyweight their investment at the sales point. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thin end of the wedge. That's where the money comes from. But it's uber important then that service provision is as globally professional and white glove as it possibly can be, and that there's so much investment given into services, because that in itself is its own marketing machine. Bad service and bad post sales ecosystems will kill company completely, because companies will consistently communicate with each other. They'll share that experience, and if it's bad, they will make much more of a noise about it than if it's good. And I think this is, again, a really important piece where we consistently reach out to our customer base, our install base, new customers with regular surveys to find out, are we doing a good job? Are we meeting your expectations from a services perspective, or what you anticipated when you were going through the sales process? If not, we need to fix it. If so, let us know why, and let us know how we can improve it. And really to make a large amount of noise about that. If that isn't available, if there's no investment put into a services provision, it effectively can retrospectively kill what the wonderful people in sales are doing. And it's a really bad means to an end. There's a brick wall, it's a cul-de-sac, and all you're doing then is trying to generate new business after new business after new business. And we all know that your greatest pool of new business is probably from your existing client base. And it's something that HubSpot looked at quite closely a number of years ago about our own install base and how can we best cater to them. And that's where we have such a huge alignment between our service division and our sales division. We work hand in glove. Our salespeople will work very closely to find out from us, what can I present as a service offering, because it's part and parcel of what our customers are purchasing. Yeah, it's a piece of software ultimately, but what comes with that is that service offering. So there has to be huge investment in that service offering in order for that to be a successful relationship, John.
I've heard the phrase, retention is the new growth, and kind of leaning towards why customer success is so critical today. What would you say to people that kind of have the mindset that a customer success program is really only a cost center?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that so many times, cost center. I mean, I suppose it's down to what your definition of that actually is. I would argue against it because of the ability to see growth from existing customers. Retention for me is a static word, and it doesn't suggest development or growth. It simply means hang on to what you've got. And I think that's not what services is actually about. And this is legacy stuff that's quite annoying, that there is that perception around services literally just being farmers and holding on to what we've got and having no hand in development. And that's, again, the one big thing that would differentiate HubSpot from a lot of companies out there, that retention is not enough. Retention really is not enough for a services division to be successful and to get rid of that millstone that is cost center. We have tons of programs at HubSpot that look at our install base from the perspective of development, cross-sell, upsell. What more can we provide to delight these customers outside of simply just being there for them? I think if a service provision is from that environment of let's just make sure we're here for our customers and react to them, then that company's going to be dead in the water. Reaction, I think, is a big part of it, but proactivity has got to be at the forefront for a very successful services division in order to, again, shift that whole cost center moniker, which again is patently wrong. So I think in order to shift that, you got to think proactively. You've got to look at customers and be 3 steps ahead of them in terms of what they think they need, and to invest heavily in very strategic account personnel that know that retention is not enough. That's certainly what I would say to people about the cost center thing. We're not, it's a perception. And if a company has a cost center millstone around their neck, it's probably of their own doing and they're not proactive enough.
Yeah, that's very good. When your customers succeed, you succeed. So I mean, it's very common now for businesses that are utilizing customer success programs to see up to 50% increase in revenue and 50% faster growth. So in order to kind of attain that level of revenue growth, the people stuff is hugely important, I would imagine, in any customer success program. Talk to us a little bit about the profile of people that are suited to a customer success role, because it confuses people sometimes. It's neither customer support or sales or marketing, or what kind of profile of person really succeeds in this role?
Another great question, and I think there's a couple of words could sum up a really successful services person. Fearless is probably the first one that I would put on the table. We hire a profile of people who are entrepreneurial and they're not afraid to take steps outside of their comfort zone or encourage their customers to take steps outside of their comfort zone as well. Entrepreneurial, people who can look at a company and think around the corner for them, that can partner with them, that are dynamic and vibrant of thought, that are happy with possibilities, that genuinely have an interest in that company that they're responsible for. We wouldn't look at profiles of people who are happy to be the account managers of old, just protect the business, back to that retention word that we used. We want a profile of people who are adventurous, that are happy to take risks. And when we have people like that are personality driven, that are able to buy into our customers and have them buy into them, they can bring them along on this adventure. We all know that if companies don't take risks or they don't push the boundaries, the envelopes, they never grow, they never develop. And having a profile of people in our company that are happy to do that is so important. It also opens up possibilities. It's also one of these can-do attitudes that we look for, that nothing is impossible, no matter how crazy it might sound. And what our customers see from that type of attitude is this vibrancy, and it's infectious. And I've seen it so many times over the 7 years that I've been at HubSpot, where customers have said to me, I ever work with anybody but that type of person again. They've made me look inside myself. They've made me feel fearless about my business. They've made me feel adventurous about my business. They've opened up doors of possibilities that I never would have dreamt about before. Their enthusiasm for me and my company is infectious. Now, people are born with that type of natural characteristic, and that's the type of people that we go after from a profile perspective. There are people that can manufacture it, they can turn it on and they can turn it off, but it's very easy to see that if it's manufactured and if it's not particularly genuine. But that's the type of general profile that we want from everyone within the services aspect. Is, look, don't satisfy yourself with just this base layer. Let's push the boundary. Let's try things. Let's break things. Let's be entrepreneurial about it, and let's be fearless.
All right, so that's a great description of that ideal profile, and I can certainly relate to it, having had the pleasure of working with HubSpot and other organizations with services being key. I think that's a very accurate description of that, and I definitely want to talk about fostering that in a moment's time. But before we get to that, Rory, I know HubSpot would be absolutely no strangers to adding words to the dictionary and making them up quite often on the spot at any given all hands meeting. And you mentioned there earlier about customer delight. And one of the phrases that was banded around was this idea of delition. And I'm wondering, do you have a specific example, maybe perhaps without mentioning a name, if you would, of a customer you found that really you took from that kind of embryonic stage almost, and you really made them become that kind of company they always wanted to become, and kind of you watch them along that journey? Did any kind of come to mind?
Yeah, first one that comes to mind is actually not that far from where we are. This company are a physical training trainer company. They're over in Blackrock here in Dublin. I started working with this company, let's say 5 years ago, when I was working as an individual contributor. My responsibility was to take this very small company on. They bought HubSpot for very specific reasons. A large part of that was to get into that inbound marketing sphere. Up until that point in time, they'd only looked in from the outside. They had an idea what it was. They had an idea of how to harness digital media, social media, how to have a content machine, and how to have a voice. They just didn't know how to do it. They got to HubSpot. They were obviously sold the dream by our salespeople. They read all of our marketing. They consumed all of the content that we had, and they were ready to go with us. And I had the pleasure to work with Sean, who was the main POC at the company, for the 3-month term that we have to train our customers. And it was a struggle, and Sean admitted it was a struggle to try to get around it. A lot of roadblocks, one of them being that he was pretty much a one-person show, a very small company, but he had a very definite goal in his head, and we had lots of roadblocks, lots of challenges. There was a case in time where he thought that he might not be able to do this, and that he might have to give up his HubSpot license because of timing, cash flows and things like that. But this guy never, ever let go of that ambition that he had, which was become an influencer in his own chosen sphere. And he saw the HubSpot thing as the way into that. And now Sean is probably one of the most vocal social and digital voices in his chosen field of operations that I have ever seen. Now, this is maybe 5 years in the product, but this is one of the most incredible voices in that industry I've ever seen. And for me, I like to look at it as having played some tiny, tiny part in this to help Sean stay on track, to help him realize his dream. And also that software that he bought, that HubSpot software, was allowing him to find his feet, to see where the roadblocks were, but also to find out, how do I do this? I don't care how anybody else does it. I need to figure out how I do it. And Ross, you mentioned that phrase, dilation. It's hard actually said, delation, which I think maybe Dharmesh had created or coined. But yes, that is the embodiment of it, is the fact that if you have a goal and someone helps you to get to that goal and they sustain it, but they help you realize more, that's delation. Being happy with something is just delivering on it. But if you deliver 10, 15, 25% more than the expectation, that is delation in a nutshell.
I think that's a very good description of it, and I can very much echo that sentiment. That's a great example. So you can clearly hear in your voice the levels of enthusiasm and passion, etc. And that's Rory Kelly. How do you then go into leadership and teach others how to be that passionate? I mean, obviously you try and recruit and interview folks who are of that ilk and share your similar value set, but how do you then replicate yourself and step into the cloning machine, as it were, to really translate that message across a team?
That's a really difficult one. It is kind of hard to impose your own blueprint and your own emotional content and your own emotional attitude towards something on someone else. It's really, really tricky. I think the most important thing to start with is, we talked about this a little bit earlier, the profile of people that we look for is very, very important. And if we see the seeds of passion, the seeds of enthusiasm for anything really in that individual, that's what we've got in terms of something to work with. And we really will look for the rudimentary clay of an individual that we can develop, help develop, mold and shape the way that they want to. But I think passion comes in different forms and enthusiasm comes in different forms. We like to think that if people have applied to or for a role within HubSpot, that they have already found out a lot about it, that there is an intrinsic passion there anyway. Trying to blueprint my passion and enthusiasm onto someone else it wouldn't be responsible for me to try to do that. What is responsible for me and what I try to do is get those people to find their own fire within their own passion, their own enthusiasm. And that can happen through a couple of different things. For me, the first and primary one is leading by example and letting people see my own enthusiasm, my own ambitions, and my own heartfelt interest in what I did. It's a little bit like if you have a 2-year-old or 3-year-old kid that will intently watch you doing something and they want to do it because they are interested in it. It's curiosity, but they also can feel your own intrinsic passion coming through. It's infectious. And then from that point, it's really just keeping the fire lit underneath that person. But they've got to find their own enthusiasm. It can be manufactured, but it soon burns out. It has to be a genuine thing. And it all begins, I think, with that profile.
Yeah, I would definitely echo those sentiments myself. I suppose, what would you say are some of your core values as a leader? What are the things that you, I suppose I've asked this question before and some of them are obvious. What are things that you absolutely won't stand for? And the obvious ones are the lying, cheating, stealing ones, etc. But yeah, what are the ones? One would assume that we are hiring people who aren't of that disposition, I suppose. Moreover, what are the ones that are absolute musts or pillars for you as a leader? And where do you find they really play out in the team-based scenario?
Yeah, and again, another really good question. I mean, I think the things that I look for personally are the nature of transparency and the nature of openness. Now, it's not always easy because typically the working environment is a professional environment, and so there's a decorum and there's guardrails and there's lines of demarcation, but they still don't restrict the ability for us to be human beings. I've never really been a big fan of the old school hierarchy of I'm your manager and I manage you and this is our relationship. I really don't subscribe to that at all. I think it's old school, and I think it really closes a lot of doors in terms of getting to know the people you're responsible for. A large part of what I hold very, very dear when it comes to working with other people is the nature of psychological safety. Psychological safety for me is paramount. Everything is built on top of that. I can turn one of my team members into the greatest person they can ever be, as long as I have psychological safety and that they feel safe and secure to open up to me, to be transparent, to be honest with me, and to speak to me like a human being and have that in return. I've worked with individuals in the past that have brought legacy psychosis, neurosis, whatever you want to call it, into the relationship. And they've said things to me that they believe I wanted to hear. Not necessarily transparent and not feeling honest, because that was the environment that they were institutionalized into. It's hard to sort of shift that, and it's hard to kind of break down those barriers. And it's a slow burn to allow people to express themselves and to feel safe and comfortable being themselves in the work environment. But when we get there, that nature of psychological safety becomes very apparent. And that's where I think the breakdown of, look, forget about me as your manager, and I'm going to forget about you as the managed. I'm Rory and you're John. Let's do this together because we both have a common goal. You have certain North Stars and objectives that you want to achieve in your work and life. The company has the same. Let's align those two things to make both of them work in tandem. And when you break those sorts of barriers down, nothing is impossible. Everything is possible. It's two human beings working towards a common goal. And that's the kind of thing that I hold incredibly dear. That would be my playbook, or at least one of the big parts of the playbook as me as a person manager, Ross.
Sure. Okay. Well, can you maybe just share with us some of the tools that allowed you to break down some of those barriers, and maybe what wins did they lead to?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the first and most important tool is our ability to have ongoing conversations and one-to-one sessions with the people that we're responsible for managing at HubSpot. There are no specific, I suppose, physical tools that we employ in this one outside of our own ability to be human beings. And I think a large part of what we do as managers at HubSpot is, certainly with new hires, is to present ourselves to them first and foremost. There's a really interesting little thing that we do in team meetings, and we call it "What Shapes Me." And we'll do that with new employees, where myself and other managers will select photographs from our history that represent parts of who we are, what our makeup is, either work related or non-work related, things that kind of bear our souls, things that you might not necessarily think people would be comfortable bringing into the workplace, maybe some personal things that they want to share with. But that, as a manager, allows me to kind of open up and to demonstrate to a new hire, look, this is the environment that you're coming into. It is open, and if you want to take advantage of it, you certainly can. I mean, it's not something that we would force on everybody, because you're obviously going to get people who want to keep work separate and their life separate, and never the twain will meet. But one of the big tools is simply that, allowing people to get to know us behind that kind of manager veil, and breaking that down is a huge part of it. And then over time, and we've lots and lots of sociality within HubSpot, as you can imagine, being that type of tech sector. It gives us the chance to get to know each other and not have this kind of manufactured relationship between a manager and a managed, where they're out as a social gathering and you feel you have to say certain things. We break that way down. We literally rip that up and throw it out the window. A lot of people form and forge very strong friendships within HubSpot simply because of that. We throw that guidebook out the window. So really, just the simple tool of being open, honest, and transparent with people that we work with.
Okay. No, that makes complete sense. And I know the social interaction piece is key. Communication leads to that as well. Is there any specific wins, obviously, again, without sharing any names, that you feel that would be pertinent, that you felt really good about from a leadership standpoint?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, for me, quite recently, I mean, the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, I had a new hire that was simply cut from that block of bringing legacy experience into HubSpot, where they didn't work in that type of environment before. And it was very regimented, very hierarchical, and it was the absolute carbon opposite of our HubSpot culture and values. And honestly, Ross, I mean, this might sound a little bit dramatic, but this individual felt like a rescue puppy from a pound that had been abused in the past. So this person had brought that to the table. They were very, very against opening up. They weren't interested in sharing. It was quite a sad scenario. This person is an absolute genius at what they do, but it was just that piece. So a large part of me felt quite sad about them having experienced the past the way they did, which wasn't good. And it was really preventing them from fully experiencing and enjoying what HubSpot could offer from a cultural perspective. So over weeks and months of me being open, encouraging psychological safety, leading by example, delicate diplomacy, this person was soon able to open up gradually over time. If we had perpetuated that, if we had that system of managed and manager in HubSpot, if we didn't have the culture that we have, that type of relationship would have stayed with that person. That psychosis would have stayed with that person forever, making their enjoyment of work non-existent. And a big win for me was simply that this person now at HubSpot enjoyed the job. And I was told by this person that it was the first time in their entire life that they were happy to come to the office, to come to work and to do their day job, simply because of that.
That's a serious win. No, there's no doubt that that's very experiential. I can hear how that turned around. I've had similar experiences in my own career, and I think, to be fair, HubSpot does a really, really good job of fostering and setting the tone from a cultural perspective. So I suppose there's two levels of culture in my book. One is the company level culture, and then the other is kind of the region or the country level culture. So I know, having been at HubSpot, there was a decision taken by the COO, JD Sherman, to come to Ireland. London was discussed, and Ireland seemed a no-brainer from his own prior experience. And I think, you know, I understand the IDA do a great job of office tours and showing them around Google and Facebook as well, etc. And they were given that sales pitch. But I know from my own experience, the leadership at the time that landed in Dublin really hadn't experienced this and hadn't seen Dublin as a platform culturally to grow. So obviously it was a kind of a, I don't want to say clinical decision, but it was more of a kind of weighing up the facts scenario to go into Dublin and to grow because others had done it. The tax made sense, and there was that talent pool, and they were locating themselves in that hub of that tech scene as well. But I suppose what I'm keen to learn, and we always ask the crack question at the end of a discussion, what do you feel HubSpot as an organization learned from that Irish experience as they kind of grew from the small numbers we started at, you know, kind of the 15 to 50 employee range to where they are now at a colossal 1,000 people and growing? What's that journey been like, do you think, from an American perspective, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, a good way to look at it from the American perspective as opposed to ours, because, you know, me, you, anybody listening to this from an Irish perspective knows what the crack is, knows the warmth and the vibrancy, the talent pool and the tax, all of those no-brainers that would encourage a company to set things up. But from the American perspective, and I know this for a fact, having, you know, spent a lot of time with JD, is the fact that we would tell the Americans what to do. And we would not be afraid to tell the Americans what to do and how to do it. Now, to substantiate that a little bit more, through no fault of their own and through no malice or anything negative, when they set up in Dublin, they had a certain way of doing things, a certain attitude to how the work ethic was, a certain, even to the point, a very specific example of every single day at 5 o'clock, there would be a general employee meeting of some nature. And it was something that they did in the States. And it was causing a lot of consternation with this sort of 15 or 20 people who were already in the office there, mostly Irish employees who railed against this 5 o'clock meeting where typically they would want to be out and out the door and home. And certain other things were brought into the mix that were sent over from Cambridge that it didn't really sit in this cultural environment. And we sat down with leadership from Cambridge and said to them, look, these sorts of things are not going to fly here. We need to think about localization from certain aspects. And the Americans, in fact, said, well, you know, we do this in Cambridge and, you know, we'd like to have this across the board. And I remember one of my colleagues at that stage had said to them very specifically, okay, here's an example for you. You land in Dublin, you grab a car, you hire a car, you try to drive it on the other side of the road and you try to pay for your beer in dollars. How far do you think you're going to get? And there was a pregnant pause. And it was at that point that the realization dawned on the Cambridge brethren that, okay, we need to take our design cues. We need to take our direction on the ground, culturally, idiosyncratically, all of that sort of stuff. And in fairness to them, they're wonderful at that, and they've been that way ever since. It's typical of Boston that they won't make a move until they consult the local entity. And as you know now, we've got entities Paris and in Berlin and obviously in Dublin. So most of the decisions are made after consultation from a localization point of view. So I think HubSpot are wonderful in that regard. They again, it's a nature, or it's testament to their treat everyone like an adult, treat everybody like they're intelligent and that they have a voice and that they've got meaning to that.
Yeah, I would fully echo that sentiment as well. That was very much my experience. And I think that the phrase that sticks out for me is use good judgment, whereby they're like, we're enabling you to make your own decision because we trust you. And it's actually quite unnerving when you hear that to begin with. You're like, okay, that's quite empowering. How do I deal with this and do this next? And God, I better perform type of thing. But you can only have that when you have the right people on board that understand the power that that's been given. And I think, as you say, they're very open to suggestion, etc. And I suppose from an Irish perspective, we have, much like our Australian brethren, I would share a sentiment with, and obviously an office exists in Sydney as well for HubSpot, is that we have this ability to get the job done. And the numbers are reflected in that. And you know, having worked for several American multinationals in my time, the number is the number and the number gets done. And that's not up for negotiation, but it's how we get there is a discussion point. And I think that's where we've been able to leverage our own kind of skill set as a nation to be able to convey that message and translate. I talk about translating US business into a European context here on the show, and I think that's very much a paramount example of how that's the case. In terms of anything else, is there any other little anecdotes or elements of crack that you feel are important for our listeners that you've experienced during your journey from kind of media into SaaS, etc., Rory, at this point?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was the whole breakdown of old school business practices. And you mentioned about use good judgment, and for me that was the scariest thing I have ever experienced. It really was. It was petrifying, and I do still see this with new hires that are coming through, that they're like a deer caught in the headlights when they ask me a question about X, Y, and Z, and I look at them and says, "Well, what do you think? Well, what would you like to do? It's your call." And that sends a serious panic through some people, and it's understandable, because if you're not straight out of college, if you're coming from other companies, you may never have experienced that before. A large part of what we also struggle with, which is funny as well, is the nature of being your own boss. I mean, HubSpot provides, as a lot of other American companies do, the nature of unlimited leave. Take whatever time you want, come in whenever you want, leave whenever you want. We don't micromanage, and that also scares people to death. They need the guardrails. They need people to tell them what to do. And trying to decouple from that is a large part of what my job as a manager is. I mean, anecdotally, I've seen people petrified to actually ask me for some leave, or they would phone me to say, "Look, I'm in the doctor. Can I have a little bit more time?" Or, "I'm in the dentist. You mind if I come in a little bit later?" And when I say to them, "Oh, tell me when you want to come back, and I'll see you when I see you," and there's this silence where they just cannot process it. And you have to sit down and then talk to people from a psychological therapist point of view. And
Sure.
I've had conversations with people on my team, and I have turned into a therapist, because psychologically they're ill-equipped to deal with the affordances that they get from HubSpot.
I can 100% relate to that. And I can tell you, I have a personal trainer and he is my therapist. Actually, it was very interesting. Just as a sidebar, I was listening to the CEO of Woody's, which for our listeners is the largest hardware chain in the country, and has been closed for 7 weeks now. And he said, "We're not actually in the hardware business, we're in the therapy business." And I just thought it was an interesting discussion around how they help people to keep busy, particularly in the current climate and the lockdown phase that we're in because of the COVID situation. And I just thought that was a very, very interesting description. He's very well and cleverly marketed his organization and sold to customers who'll be queuing outside his door on Monday morning when things open up. And I think that's very, very true, and as a leader, you need to be that shoulder. And I found this too. People tell you things that you wildly had no idea about, you had no expectation that this was going on. And it's your job to ultimately get the company where it needs to go, but use that human capital in an effective and compassionate fashion to deliver and help them be better about themselves. So that would definitely be my sort of belief system. And I think also just another point, we're getting to an interesting phase of kind of millennials versus that old school. And I think there's my generation, I would say, is on the cusp of the two. We kind of sit between them. But I think there's an expectation. Maybe Rory, you might share a story or two around this, but there's an expectation from the millennials that this is a granted and a given. And I want to know how many hammocks and unicycles and free beer Fridays you have and that type of stuff. Have you seen the other extreme?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I'm also of a vintage that has the I suppose the gift, or maybe it's the curse, of knowing what old school is. So I from that environment, and I also have then the visibility of seeing people coming into the tech sector and companies like HubSpot that they haven't worked in that, they haven't experienced it. This is the normal for them: the hammocks, the skateboards, the free food, the free beer. My only concern in that instance is the sense of entitlement. And I've had conversations with kids in HubSpot in elevators where I've said to them, you got to really bring yourself into context here. That all of this kind of stuff is you can't take it for granted. This sort of stuff is part and parcel, yes, of this culture, but you cannot take it for granted. And it's a bit like one of these conversations you have with somebody. You say, yeah, when I went to school, We walked over glass to get there. We didn't have any shoes. We didn't have any TVs. And I find myself dropping into that old duffer type of conversation. I want to try and stay away from as much as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the dad moment, right? You're like, I just said the sentence my dad said to me.
Exactly, yeah, and it galls me, and I try to stay away from it as much as possible. But you're right. I mean, this is the norm as far as business is concerned and business practices and places. And I agree with all of it, because I think the biggest thing for me is to try to make sure that the environment that any worker is in is enjoyable and it's comfortable, and that we reward them for the hard work that they put in. And if that manifests itself on free beer or food or unicycles, then so be it. I think what is very, very, very important, though, is humility and humbleness. You don't have to have worked in a coal mine before HubSpot to have humility and be humble. It's about the human element, being appreciative and understanding what you actually have. And for me, that's singularly the most important aspect of that. It's an appreciation of what this new work environment provides.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And one of the elements we've talked about on prior shows, and you've said it a lot better than I've heard it before, is this element of coachability. And without exception, there is not an organization that I would want to, quite frankly, associate myself with that would hire anyone who isn't coachable. I think that's a primary objective trait, as it were, that somebody absolutely needs to have. And I think if you can guard against that sense of entitlement piece and have a kind of an honest give-get, then I think you're on the track to being very, very successful. Yep. Well, look, Rory, I really want to thank you for your time today on the show. I think you've added tremendous insight and great value, and really appreciate it, and look forward to talking with you on future shows about some of the other items we could easily talk about and dive deeper on. So thank you again, Rory.
Ross, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
You've been listening to the European Tech Hire podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping global leaders figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, see sf/talent.com.